Good evening. Welcome to this next edition. We have done more than 135 programs so far, and CIC welcomes all of you to this latest webinar of ours. The CIC, for all those who do not know us, is a not-for-profit organization formed to promote exchange of information and ideas in the fields of education, business, finance, economics, arts, commerce, literature, law, science and technology, politics, public administration, social sciences, sports and culture. It was founded in 2016 and it was conceived by some of the city's accomplished industrialists and professionals with an objective of creating an intellectual hub for the city's intelligentsia to meet, share, discuss, and evolve transformational ideas. As CIC aspires to be a spa for the mind and the soul. So with this short introduction, let me go to today's program. We are on the 136th program of the CIC. And today we have an extremely distinguished panel who will be having a lively discussion on a book on the grandfather of Tamil, as he is called, on the essays of Uwe Swaminathan. The session will be moderated by Sri N. Ravi. N. Ravi, for those of you, needs no introduction, but he is the chairman of Kasturi and Sons Limited, the holding company of the Hindu group of newspapers. He was earlier the editor-in-chief of the Hindu. He was chairman of the Board of Press Trust of India and was also the president of the Editors Guild of India. He is the chairman of the Indian chapter of the International Press Institute and has been a member of the executive board of the International Press Institute, Vienna. He is currently chairman of Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, Chennai, Kendra. He is also a member of the National Integration Council and from 2006 to 2008 on the National Security Advisory Board. He has a master's degree in economics and a degree in law and has won several academic awards, including a gold medal in constitutional and international law. He was a fellow at the Harvard Law School in 2000 and a Shorenstein Fellow at the Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University in 2004. In 2013, he was a visiting fellow at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism and St. Anthony's College, Oxford University. He is the recipient of several professional awards, including the G.K. Reddy Memorial Award and BREAD Role Model Award, and was awarded an honorary doctorate by the Sri Venkateswara University. Welcome, Sri Ravi. He would be the moderator of today's session. On the panel, we have the two authors of the book, Prabha Sridevan. Justice Prabha Sridevan began practicing law in 1983, and from 2000 to 2010, she was judge of the Madras High Court. From 2011 to 2013, she was chairman of the Intellectual Property Appellate Board. Now retired, Prabha Sridevan writes columns both in Tamil and English. She is a translator of fiction from Tamil to English. Seeing in the Dark and Echoes of the Veena are her translations of Chudamani's short stories. The latter won the VOW Award for the Best Translation 2019. She has translated other writers like Sita Ravi, Himayam, Meeran, Ravi Kumar, and S. Ramakrishna. Wisdom and Grace is a translation of the lectures of the sage of Anchi. Welcome, ma'am. Welcome to this panel discussion. Pradeep Chakravarti. Pradeep Chakravarti was educated in the school, in the school KFI, MCC and JNU, and later went on to do his master's in the London School of Economics. He is currently pursuing a PhD on the Pandyan Empire as gleaned from inscriptions. He started his career with his family business, the TVS, and then worked in Cognizant, Infosys, and McKinsey. He now works on learning and development models based on Indian history and conducts heritage tours of Tamil Nadu. He has authored books on temple Vahanas, Tanjavur, Kodaikanal, Ashok Leyland, and this will be his 8th book. Welcome, Pradeep. Welcome to this panel discussion. We have with us another distinguished panelist, Mr. Tiruppugar. Dr. Tiruppugar retired from the Indian Administrative Service. He served as Additional Secretary to the Government of India. After joining the civil services, he had served in various district assignments as Assistant Collector, District Development Officer, District Collector, before he was posted as the Joint Chief Executive Officer of the State Disaster Management Authority in Gujarat. In addition to his contribution in Gujarat earthquake reconstruction and disaster management initiatives in Gujarat, as Joint Additional CEO and CEO of GSDMA, he held several senior positions such as Commissioner and Secretary Rural Development, Commissioner of Information, Secretary to the Chief Minister in Government of Gujarat. He also served as a Senior Advisor, Nepal Planning Commission, and Senior Advisor, Nepal National Reconstruction Authority, following the massive 2015 earthquake in Nepal. In Government of India, he was Advisor, Policy and Planning in the National Disaster Management Authority, New Delhi. He was instrumental in preparing the first ever National Disaster Management Plan. He played a key role in preparing several national guidelines, such as guidelines on management of thunderstorm and lightning, and minimum standards of relief, guidelines on preparation of heat wave action plan, etc. National guidelines for preparation of cold wave, visibility, and inclusive disaster management and temporary shelters are some of the publications which Dr. Tiruppugar has brought up. He has authored many book chapters and journal articles related to disaster management. He received his PhD in disaster management from the Australian National University, Canada. Apart from an illustrious career, he has a keen interest in literature, especially Tamil literature, and we are very happy to welcome him to the CIC and to this panel discussion. Welcome, Dr. I now hand over the session to Sri Ravi to moderate the panel discussion. Over to you, Mr. Ravi.
Good evening, and thank you, Dr. Chandramouli, and thanks to the Chennai International Center for arranging this rather unusual event on the translated essays of U.A. Sominath Iyer, the great Tamil savant. As you would have noticed from the introductions of the panelists, Justice Prabha Devan, Mr. Pradeep Chakravarti, and Dr. Tiruppugar, their scholarship in Tamil is far deeper than mine. Yet, armed with this very elegant translation of the essays of U.A. Sa, I have made bold to venture into this event. Who was U.A. Sominath Iyer, known variously as Mahapadhyaya U.A. Sa or Tamil Tata? Rather, I should be asking, who does not know of U.A. Sominath Iyer, who more than anyone else helped Tamil gain recognition as a classical language? His exemplary contribution and his life's mission was to collect, edit, and publish the corpus of Sangam and ancient Tamil poetry that is lying in the form of palm leaf manuscripts in mutts in the houses of Tamil lovers and ordinary people of Tamil Nadu. He traveled across the state in search of the manuscripts that were in bits and pieces with incomplete versions, edited them, and annotated them copiously with footnotes before publication. In other words, he enabled the general Tamil readers to make sense of the ancient epics, going to extraordinary lengths to find the meaning of a word or the significance of a proverb. Such was his dedication and monumental contribution that Rabindranath Tagore, who met him in Chennai, or what was then Madras in 1926, was moved to write a poem on him in Bengali, which runs roughly like this, and I quote, "The ancient glory of Dravidian country was recorded on palm leaves, and it was known to the world because of you. Like sage Agastya, you put Mother Tamil on a higher pedestal. He adorned the feet of Mother Tamil with the 5 epics such as Chintamani and Manimekalai, and that was Tagore on Swaminatha Iyer. The book we are discussing today is not about his contribution in bringing the Tamil epics to the broader public view, though that is always the inevitable backdrop to his writings. Swaminatha Iyer did not fancy himself as a poet. He considered Subramanya Bharati, whom he knew well and interacted with, as an outstanding poet. However, he did write a biography of the great teacher Meenakshi Sundaram Pillai and his autobiography detailing how he went about collecting the manuscripts and publishing them. He also wrote a series of essays, and this book is a translation of 30 of them. The two writers, Justice Prabhas Sridevan and Mr. Pradeep Chakravarti, must be congratulated for bringing to the non-Tamil reading public the thoughts and experiences of a great figure in Tamil history. Dr. Thirupugar has prepared an excellent synopsis of the book in the form of a presentation, for which our grateful thanks. We could start with that before we move on to the views of the two scholars who have translated the writings. Then we can follow up with a discussion and questions. Now over to Dr. Thirupugar for his presentation.
Thank you, sir. The host has disabled screen sharing. Please, can you enable this? Okay, thank you. When I was in my college, my English professor taught me how to read an essay. He said that I should focus on 3 aspects: content, form, and presentation. He also added that content is more important than the form because the form has to flow from the function. But when I started reading serious non-fiction, including essays, I evolved my own framework to analyze essays, which consists of 8 criteria: accuracy, clarity, relevance, logic, precision, depth, fairness, and breadth. I used this framework to analyze the essays in this volume. As far as accuracy is concerned, meticulous documentation. He mentions year, month, place, and other minute details. He himself writes, in the field that fit, whichever town I visited, I would learn about the stories of the poets, patrons, the hagiology, the stories that had been preserved orally, and carefully note them down. So as far as accuracy is concerned, 100%. Clarity, very clear, easy to understand. Relevance, there is a lesson or a moral implication embedded in each of the essay. I think these essays are more relevant today than at that point of time. Logic does not provide logical arguments like Bertrand Russell, but offers self-explanatory evidences. Precision, very particular about the precise meaning of the words and usage. I think you find it in the translated version also. As far as depth is concerned, we should remember that he was writing to lay readers in magazines, weeklies, bi-monthlies, or monthly magazines, and some of the essays are transcriptions of his public talk. So it is not like an article written in a peer-reviewed journal or an academic textbook. Considering the fact that he was writing to lay readers, there is enough depth in these essays. Fairness, unbiased presentation of facts and context. Breadth covers a range of subjects from humorous incidents to explaining Sangam poetry. There is an essay here. Who was he? Why should we know him? This introduction on Uesa by the translators provide a good overview of the life and work of Uesa in just 12 pages. It sets the context and background for reading the essays. So I would suggest that this is an essential reading before one reads the essays. But what surprised me was the statement by Venkat Rao. What is the use of learning Tamil in this day and time? Even 120 years ago, learning Tamil as a career option was discouraged. Today, the position is the same. Things have not changed much. When you read translations, you have to keep many things in mind. First is not reading for the meaning only, but for language and formal features of translation. This is very, very important. Not to overlook the cultural connotations and context. Because when you are reading an essay written in a different period of time, in a different language, in a different cultural context, we have to keep this in mind. And not to skip the introduction by the translators. Here, there is a small 3-page note given by the translators, which is very essential. See, we have to take care not to take one translation as representative of an entire foreign literature. We have to compare it to translations from other works from the same language, which means one can begin with the essays of Uvesa, but one cannot stop with reading this book. Translation is a tricky business. I have some experience of translating books. I've translated the book of Osho from English to Tamil, his numerous discourses, and many of the book chapters of Osho. Translators face many dilemmas. The first is, should one go for exact translation or convey the intention and meaning of the text? The other is, should one focus on the author or the target audience? Because the author is writing in a shared cultural context, in a shared language, in a shared time period. But when we are translating it for a different set of audience in a different culture, reading it in a different context and language, the dilemma is whether to focus on the author or on the target audience. The third dilemma is how to translate the connotation, not just the meaning. The fourth is, it is not enough if we translate the words. The words have cultural, contextual, and historical weight behind them. How would we translate those things? And there are some untranslatable words. For example, ayyo. Kamban uses this. Veyyon voli tan meniyin virisodiyin maraya, poyyo yenum idayalodum ilayanodum pona, mayyo mara kadamo mari gadalo madai mugilo, ayyo ivan vadivenvadur adiya alagudaya. How will you translate this ayyo? Ayyo in this context has one particular meaning. Let us see ayyo in another context. Padithavan sudum pavamum panninal ayyo vendru povan endu solgirar Bharadiyar. How will you translate that ayyo? So translators have a lot of difficulties. And there are losses and gains in reading translation. J. Rubin, who has translated many of the works of Haruki Murakami, says, when you are reading Murakami, you are reading me at least 95% of the time. So you'll be reading the translators, not the original author. But fortunately, when you read this collection of essays in this book, 95% of the time, you are reading the author, not the translator. Again, when you read the original as well as the translated version, there is another gain, that is the gain of seeing things from the perspective of someone else. So I did gain by reading both the original as well as the translated version. I am reminded of an incident in Tagore's life. When Tagore translated Gitanjali into English, he gave it to C.F. Andrews for making necessary corrections. Andrews corrected it in 4 places because he felt that the grammar in those 4 places is not sitting properly. This was sent to W.B. Yeats. Yeats got back to Tagore and told him, the poetry is brilliant, but in 4 places, the poetic sense is not sitting properly. Incidentally, these 4 places were exactly the 4 places in which C.F. Andrews made correction. So that is the dilemma. Should one do justice to the sense of the writing or to the grammatical and language part of it? Finally, this is a very big dilemma. Should difficult and complicated text be translated into a text which is easily understood? Normally, we will say yes. Let's see what great writers say. Milan Kundera, in his The Unbearable Torment of Translation, says about one of his books translated into French, what in original text is illogical, fragmented becomes logical and rational in the French translation. This perfectly describes how the translator has disregarded the true meaning of the text and translated it into his own. So it is not always good to translate a complicated text into an easily readable text. So how have the translators handled this dilemma? Let us see. They have kept the target audience in mind. They have not translated many difficult poems, but they have ensured that the context and meaning are not lost. Example, musical instruments, the women of Tamil Nadu, and women in ancient times. In order not to lose the context, emotion, and meaning, they have used many Tamil words, but they have included a glossary. For example, the Tamil word Ayya, they have kept it as Ayya because Ayya has different shades of meaning. Vanakkam Ayya means respect. Vaya Poya என்று சொன்னால் அவமரியாதை. மரியாதையா பேசுங்க, வாயா போயா என்று கூப்பிடாதீர்கள் என்று சொல்லுவார்கள். So they have handled this dilemma very well. Third is, the translators have done a great job of giving us the near real feeling of reading the original. As if you are reading the original text. That's why I have used this word, near real feeling of reading the original material. They have done justice both to the author, Uvesa, as well as the readers. Perhaps maybe because an actual justice was involved in the translation. If you look at the categories of essays, basically he has used a narrative style with evidence, but without rigorous argument. Strictly, a narrative style of essay should have rigorous arguments, but here in these essays, there is no rigorous style of arguments. These essays contain a learning lesson or a moral implication, which the translators have indicated in their note also. Most of the essays have a lot of information or humorous incidents. Many essays are autobiographical or biographical in nature. When I was reading these essays, I felt that the style is very similar to Montaigne, who merged casual anecdotes and autobiography with intellectual insight. As I said earlier, the style is mostly narrative style, but some essays follow the standard format of thesis, evidence, and conclusion. Some examples, the women of Tamil Nadu, women in olden times. In the original text, it is a single essay. The translators have split it into two essays. If you read the original text, you will find thesis, evidence, and conclusion. The thesis is stated upfront. If we look at women in the areas of wisdom, action, and wealth, we can understand their greatness. Then evidence is provided from history and literature. The conclusion states, if one collates all the references from Tamil text, it is very clear that women excelled in all spheres. Other essays are also written in this format. One example is written with a thorn. But there are many essays where the thesis is not stated upfront, just mentioned in the conclusion. Example, the legacy of family virtues. No thesis statement, narration of the incident as we heard, then conclusion. That is, Kettalum, main makkale. Other essays, what do you want? Shankarabaranam Narsayar. Neither thesis nor conclusion in many essays. Only anecdotes, personal experiences presented, the thief and the tiger, the horse tamer, and life saved. Many essays contain simple stories, anecdotes, or humorous incidences. I am not going to read this list. Similarly, some essays are autobiographical, some are biographical, and some essays contain plenty of information like schools of Easter years, musical instruments. There is a lesson or a moral implication in each of the essay. I have tried to list out some. The field that fed, old people have timeless wisdom, knowledge, information. Do not ignore or neglect them. The legacy of family virtues, not to change in adversity. A poor man's love for Tamil, if one deeply yearns for something, it will happen. He or she will get it. The wondrous act of catching the thief, not to boast in vain. The richness of Tamil institution building needs struggle and hard work. Appa Dikshita's discomfiture, reverence and respect towards one's teachers. The scribe whose pride was quelled, not to be egoistic, not to boast in vain. The sculpture at Bengaluru temple, the value of humility. Shankarabaranam Narsayar, the need for integrity and character. The European and Tirukural, value and respect for ancient works. If we read these essays, we do get a glimpse of Uvesa as a great teacher, a wanderer, traveler, meticulous documentation expert, a lover of Tamil, a lover of our tradition and culture, We also see his efforts as well as the serendipitous nature of his discoveries and findings. We come across Uesa as a philosopher, but not a dry theoretical philosopher, but a very pragmatic philosopher. I will only analyze one or two of his essays here. The first is My Aim. I would have read this at least 5 or 6 times. Upfront, he states, all my aims are somehow connected to Tamil. To read Tamil texts deeply and several times so that they reveal their many layers of meanings. He is using the word nokkam yellam. The translators have translated into all my aims. This yellam is for emphasis, not for all, because one cannot have more than one aim. You cannot aim at two things at the same time. The second is, in the conclusion, he states, there are but a few precepts from my experience with elders and in my life. I earnestly attempt to live by them. In this entire essay, he has only written 3 sentences about himself. The rest of the essay is about reading and understanding ancient texts. That is the first layer of meaning. There is a deeper layer of meaning. That is, the essay is really about living life, about values and wisdom for life. There is an outstanding paragraph in that essay. Following what our ancients did is the best way for mental peace. Then second line states, we must research and fully understand new ideas, new faiths and new gods before we choose to follow them. I used to say that there are 3 ways to learn. The first is imitation, the second is meditation, the third is frustration. Here the first sentence talks about the way of learning through imitation. Following what ancients did is the best way for mental peace. The second is about meditation. The original meaning of the word meditate is to think. Let's read it again carefully. Following what our ancients did is the best way for mental peace. So if you want mental peace, following our ancients did is the best way. But if you want something higher, something better, following what our ancients did may not be the best way. For example, if you want freedom like Socrates, you have to question the way of the ancients. If you want freedom from known like J. Krishnamurti, perhaps you have to shun always the way of the ancients as well as the moderns. If you want shunyata or emptiness like Buddha, perhaps you have to rebel against the way of the ancients. So if you want mental peace, if you want to maintain status quo, maybe following the way of the ancients is good. The second sentence, we must research and fully understand new ideas, new faiths and new gods before we choose to follow them. He's not saying that one should not accept new ideas, new faiths or new gods, but he says one must fully research and understand. It's a great statement. And the rest 3 sentences in this paragraph. We must not insult other religions and gods. Learning more about the beliefs of other religions and rare insights found in other languages will help to broaden our minds. We must live in fraternity and harmony with people from other countries or faiths. Brilliant piece of writing. I was remembered of Tagore's poem, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls. He is telling us to broaden our minds, to know more about our religion, our faith, and our language. It is essential to learn about other faiths, other beliefs. In this age of intolerance, this is a great teaching. Another essay. This essay raised many questions in me. Sundaram Pillai, a student of Meenakshi Sundaram Pillai, tells a lie and borrows a book from Desikar Trichy so that his teacher could read it. When Meenakshi Sundaram Pillai questions him why he told a lie, he quotes a Thirukural, Poimayum Vaimayidatta Purai Tirtha Nanmai Payakkum Yenil. But the question is, what is that Purai Tirtha Nanmai which Thiruvalluvar is talking about? Is it the good of an individual, or is it larger good, public good about which he is talking? If lying for the sake of money is bad, is lying for the sake of gaining knowledge good? But what surprised me was the last paragraph. I have heard Meenakshi Sundaram Pillai narrate this several times and praise Sundaram Pillai's devotion to his teacher and his quick-wittedness. So this did raise a lot of questions. Another poem is Avayar's poem about Nanjil Valluvar gifting elephants to the poets in the Women of Tamil Nadu essay. It reminded me of my father advising me when I was young. In my school days, he advised me, before you buy anything, don't look at the cost. Ask 3 questions. Whether I really need it, how much of this I will use, and can I really maintain it? Because even if something is given free of cost, gifted, you will have to spend time, money, and energy in maintaining it. If the answer is no for any one of these questions, don't accept it. This essay really reminded me of my father's advice. And in one of the essays, my experiences with students, he writes about Ganapati Iyer, Sago Ganapati Iyer. Our family had a very close relationship with Ganapati Iyer. My mother studied Tamil under him for her B.Lit and Tamil Pandit exams. Mr. Swaminathan, Ganapati Iyer's son, whom he named after his teacher, was my mother's colleague and my teacher. In fact, my younger brother also took some guidance from Ganapati Iyer while he was preparing for civil service. Many times, Kiva Jagannathan used to come to meet Ganapati Iyer. They used to discuss about Uve Swaminathan Iyer, but I was too young to understand what they discussed, the implications of their discussion. Finally, why should anyone read this book, this collection of essays, particularly a person who is reading it in English, to know the tradition and culture of Tamils? Second is to have some idea about the social, economic, and cultural life which existed nearly 100 years ago. To understand how past is manifesting in the present, how our life has changed. We can talk about change only against a changeless background. If the foreground and background both are changing, we will not be able to say what is the change. So that's why I've used this word, the past manifesting itself in the present, we can understand. There are some changeless elements in our life, even after 100 years. Finally, to get a glimpse of how Uvesa went around collecting Tamil manuscripts and revived Tamil literature, his contribution to Tamil. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tilbugar, for that exemplary dissection of the book. In fact, I don't think any one of us could have done it better. Even the authors might have been surprised by your comments and detailed analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now, before I want to go to the 2 writers, Justice Prabhasri Devan and Mr. Pradeep Chakravarti, but before that, about Dr. Swaminathan Iyer, even with his all-consuming love for Tamil and his devotion to Saivism, in many ways, he was an universalist. As he says in one of the essays in the book, which is quoted by Dr. Tilpugar, we must not insult other religions and gods. Learning more about the beliefs of other religions and rare insights found in other languages will broaden our minds. As a well-known writer, Perumal Murugan observes in his foreword to the book, Uvesa is an excellent example of how one's deep love for language and literature can expand one's world vision. The sentiment that comes through this book is for the most part gentle and liberal, though there are touches of the ingrained orthodoxy as well. Let me start with Justice Prabhasri Devan and ask her about what do you think? Why did you choose Uve Swaminathan Iyer's writings for the translation? And how would you assess them as a writer? You have translated many other more modern writers as well, but how would you rate Uve Swaminathan Iyer as a writer, apart from his great contribution to unearthing the Tamil epics?
How we chose to translate Uvesa was really pure chance. It just happened that way. And Pradeep and I always say it was meant to happen. That is how we started. And then we realized that Encharitram was already translated, and we went through the essays. And we found that Uvesa makes whatever he writes of come alive. You can really see what it was like. And I think that was what we wanted to do. It was like a history book coming alive. So many, for instance, mm, I think it was the Venganur Chirpam, uh, the, the king or the ruler doesn't mind waiting on the sculptor to hand over the beetle leaves because he felt that art is greater than his riches or wealth or his power, which is something that we could very well imbibe today and understand. There are so many such, I won't call it moral because he just very gently he just uh, transfers it to us through his words. But we realize what he's trying to tell us. As far as Uvesa as a writer, I first thought it would be very difficult. I thought it would be a very erudite and scholarly Tamil, which we may not be able to bring it to the fullest effect in English. But it is such a simple style. The only thing that marked that it was of an earlier time is some of the words which have now gone out of circulation, which he uses. Otherwise, it is a very simple, almost conversational Tamil. And I don't think we found any difficulty there. The one caution that we had in our mind was not to use words which, had Uvesa written in English, would not have used at that time. But for this, I think it's a very, very readable, very friendly style. That was what he was as a teacher, as we can see from one of the essays. So he speaks like that, he writes like that.
Thank you, Justice Prabhasri Devan. Now, if I could ask Mr. Pradeep Chakravarti about his impressions of Swaminathan Iyer as a writer and your experience in translating his collection of essays.
I will respond to this question with an anecdote that happened last evening. I was taking a group of very well-traveled, very scholarly, erudite guests from Delhi, who most of them had not visited Tamil Nadu at all. We were doing a heritage tour in Tanjavur. And to give them a sense of what Tanjavur looked like in the 1920s, one of the guests was very kind enough to read one of the essays, Feel That Fell. And this was a group of people, many of whom were visiting Tamil Nadu for the first time, certainly Tanjavur for the first time. But yet the human nature aspect of that essay, the way he describes that one frontage of a house and the old sightless lady sitting on the side, it just brought the entire group alive. And at once we could discuss how everything had changed in Tanjavur today. That essay, that incident probably happened in the 1910s or the 1920s. How Tanjavur has changed a lot and how it has not changed, because human nature is what it is. And I think for me, if I got a lot of interest in doing this, it was because of the timelessness of the aspects of human nature that Uvesa reveals about himself in essays like My Aim and his anecdotes in the other essays. As a writer, like my co-translator has observed, it was actually a pleasure and a joy to do it. There were some essays that were very deeply painful as well. Painful in the sense that we have lost so much of the richness of the language with which we speak. There is an essay called Beggar's Song, where a beggar is able to sing a verse which is not from the Sangam period, but of that style. So even a beggar was in a way a poet, or was able to reproduce a poem, not just recite a Sangam, an ancient Tamil verse, but also sing it to a song. And we've lost that kind of scholarship today. There is another one where by sheer happenstance, he hears of one man using a proverb that unlocks a whole passage of a commentary from the Manimekalai or the Jivaka Sintamani. And it brought to me how rich Tamil could have been and how rich language could be in terms of the proverbs and the metaphors that we've stopped using today. So, and all of this richness, and there's another one for those of you who love food, there's one on Kumayam. And how these simple examples and simple conversations, they really open up something that he's been struggling with in the translating and the in the commentating and in the annotating of these essays. So all of these said in a very conversational style made it actually very, very easy to translate them. And over and above everything, for me, what really impacted me the most was whatever he says in the My Aim chapter, he truly, truly followed. We've read about, I think, close to 200 essays. I can't remember, 150, 200 essays. There were 4 fact volumes, and we picked from those 4, we picked a set of essays that were broadly representative of all the aspects that we thought he came. And in all of these essays, we saw that he was very much a man who lived by those words. So it was actually, I think, 1 or 2 of the essays in the beginning was a little difficult. We had to, learn the rhythm of working with each other. And then Ovesa made it very, very easy for both of us to do.
Now, with the 3 scholars here, I am tempted to go beyond this book. Uvesa's writings can never be separated from his monumental contribution to Tamil. If I could pose a counterfactual to the 3 of you on the significance of his work, if Uvesa had not done what he did, what would have been the fate of ancient Tamil manuscripts? Could some later day savant have collected and published them? Or maybe a group of disparate scholars who loved Tamil could have done that separately? Or maybe some of them would still be lying in their places unseen and possibly destroyed. These are interesting possibilities that I would invite you to speculate on, starting with Dr. Thirupugar.
It's a hypothetical question, very difficult to answer. When you read these essays also, you find, in addition to Uvesa, others were also searching for these manuscripts. You come to know somebody is searching for a manuscript, and the person who promised to give it is refusing to give it to him. He wants it to be given to somebody else, all that we see. And this did not happen only in Tamil Nadu. It happened all over the world. If you read how classic Chinese Zen texts were found again, discovered, versions after versions, people went after it, how they traced it. It's very interesting. Similarly, some versions of Bible were traced. Dead Sea Scrolls, all these things, Nag Hammadi versions. So this type of thing happened, and many people were searching at that point of time to dig out ancient scriptures. So there is a possibility somebody else would have discovered. But I do not know whether they would have contributed to this extent of correcting the text meticulously, because he was a great Tamil scholar. He could correct it, find mistakes in this, and give us the correct version. That is his great value addition.
Justice Prabhas Devan, if I could ask you to speculate on the same subject, how would you view that?
I think I agree with the Dr. Thirupugar. Others may have found them later, maybe, which meant that some more manuscripts would have been lost. But it is the meticulous, he struggles to find out the spelling. And because of the insects, Ra may look like the what I would say. Let's say instead of Nara, which is something in an earlier discussion Dr. Sudha Sashiyan mentioned, Nara could look like Na in Tamil if that tail of the Ra is not seen. So he goes to such pains to make sure that what was written would come to us like that. That we don't know whether somebody else would have done, but he did it, and we are blessed for that.
Mr. Pradeep Chakravarti, your take on, or your speculation on what could have been?
I think if we read his N. Charitram, his autobiography, he himself mentions that as a student in the Tiruvavadure Adinam library, I think, he remembers as a student seeing a copy of the Valayapati or the Kundalakesi. But then in this renewed interest and awareness of Tamil, when he goes back, he is not able to find that manuscript. So in his own time, he speaks of that, and in the Night Jasmine essay, he talks about that one happenstance of just one manuscript at the end of his trip to Arvarthanagari. He is able to get that and he discovers it. So I would think that it is very unlikely that many of these manuscripts would have survived for that one generation beyond him. I think today we are all fairly reasonably aware of what each of our manuscripts, our libraries have, the corpus that we have. But like the other, my worthy panelists have said, it's very unlikely that there would have been many people with his level of meticulousness. And I think, Mr. Ravi, we also need to look at it in the context of when he was doing this, there was no one who could help him on Buddhism, especially on the Tamil school of Buddhism, because the texts had gone, the practitioners had gone. Jainism, at least, was relatively little better. But in his ability to overcome even those kind of issues and still stick on to what he did, and I think there's a line he says where, look, the first edition might always have problems, but what is important is in the future editions, you accept that criticism and you move on and you make the changes wherever it's relevant and do it. I think that sense of the willingness to check one's own work, redo it again and again, very, very laudatory. And I doubt if many other people could have done it. So it's an interesting conversation to have, but I think we should not, in a way, take away from the enormous effort that he's put in. And at the end of the day, he did it. Nobody else did it. They might have all tried to do little parts of it, but and we certainly need to give them credit. But this kind of a comprehensive way of, especially the Jain and the Buddhist manuscripts, more than the Hindu ones, the hagiological ones, the Jain and the Buddhist ones, I doubt if anybody else would have taken this much of pain to have done it. And in that context, I think he definitely needs to be seen.
Actually, as Mr. Pradeep Chakravarti stated in his book, there's a story of the Beggar song that narrates how a Tamil scholar, on hearing a beggar sing one line of what appeared to be a beautiful old song, followed him for days along several streets until the beggar could recollect the whole song. The song was later included in the anthology compiled by the scholar. In many ways, the story mirrors the way Uvesa himself went about collecting the palm leaf manuscripts and learning new words and proverbs from the most unlikely sources, including a temple kitchen or an old man in a casual conversation about a proverb and so on. Does this story have a particular resonance to his own life?
Absolutely. I think, sorry.
Yeah, please go on.
Absolutely. And as Prabha ma'am was saying before, we were really looking for stories that captured as many facets of his life as possible.
Dr. Tirubuggar, you wanted to say something?
No, sir. I think he's right. I would agree with you.
Okay. You have Dr. Justice Prabha Sridevan, you have translated many other modern writers. In comparison with Uvesa, was the approach you adopted in this case different from what you did earlier? Was there any specific guideline or any specific issue that arose in this translation?
See, the others are all stories. I mean, the Chudamani, Miran, Emayam, they are all stories. And these are essays. So the tonal quality varies. They are not the same. So they are human beings positioned in a certain situation or saying some things. And I have tried, I don't know to what extent I have succeeded. I want the Chudamani English to be different from the Miran English, to be different from the Emayam English, and so on. They must not all sound like some school English. I want them to be different. But here, it is You don't get the tonal variations that you might when in conversation. So to that extent, this was slightly different. But I cannot use words like in a jiffy and all that, because that is something Uvesa would not have used there. So I will have to we have to use proper English words, but at the same time give the feeling that it is of a different age. If we have succeeded in doing that, I think we have to be happy. It must read well today, but it must sound a little. It must show that it belongs to a different age. We tried.
Actually, Dr. Thirupugar, if I could ask you about how USA comes out of this book, whether it seems to be a mix of liberal sentiment and orthodoxy, a bit of both, and overall he seems to be, weighing in on the side of some kind of accommodation of all and some kind of universalist values. How would you say that he comes across through this collection of essays?
So I would say that he comes across as a liberalist because he talks about an open mind and very receptive to ideas. That is what is important. How do you live your daily life is not very important. How open you are to different set of ideas. I think he was more liberal and more open to receiving different ideas.
Pradeep, is that your impression as well?
Yes, but I think at a deeper level, Uvesa was completely obsessed with Tamil and only Tamil. For him, I think that was really what was more important than liberal and orthodoxy. And there are some essays where relatively more orthodox people have tried to push him in their way, and he's gone the other way instead. So for me, when I read the essay, many of the essays, what shines through is really his obsession with Tamil more than anything else.
This is Prabhasi Devan. How would you say that USA comes across as his ideas come across through these essays?
He was really, as Dr. Thirupugar says, very liberal. I mean, yes, he has this passion for Tamil. Tamil was, for instance, in there is a what do you want? I think the essay's name is, where there is a Suddhamadalam player, and when the king asks him, "Will you come to the court and be the court musician?" He says, "I prefer to serve the Thiruvarur Tyagarajar. I don't need riches." Uvesa was like that. He wanted to serve Tamil, but he was a universal man, even with regard to what books should be included in the syllabus. There is an essay in the student's essay where he says, we must take care not to hurt anyone's feelings. There are so many subjects available. Hurtful essays need not be used in the syllabus. I think he was a very all-embracing mind. That was what he was. I don't think he had any narrowness at all. At all.
Mr. Pradeep Chakravarti, among the various essays that you put together in this book, which should you say is your favorite?
My favorite was actually the Cartman's essay. This is to recount the story very quickly without letting go of the final climax. This is a story of how a poet and a cartman travel together in a night's journey. And the poet talks about a great benefactor who had helped that poet and his ancestors, fame and name. And in the end of the day, the next day, the cartman refuses to accept the fees that the poet gives him. And the reason that he uses to refuse the fees really teaches the poet how values can be learned from anybody, from either a humble carpenter or a great royal benefactor. That one was a very important essay for me because it gave me a sense of how people conversed in those days, and also how Today we tend to bracket a lot of values with one's background and education and so on and so forth. And the essay really shows that if we look hard enough, everybody around us is a teacher. And if we can't find a lesson from somebody to learn, then we're probably not looking hard. That was an essay that moved me up.
Justice Prabhasidevan, if I could ask you, which was your favorite essay?
I don't think I can pick out any favorite essay, but because you ask, I'll refer to one essay. There is this King Marudapandiyan, and to make a chariot, they need thick wood, and he wants to cut off the wood in a particular temple, and he sends his soldiers there. The priest in the temple says, "You cannot, I take swear on God, you cannot cut this tree." And then they go back and report to the king that the priest refused to do it. Then Maruthapandiyan comes to the temple. By the time this priest absconds because he is scared of the royal wrath. And then he is assured that he would not be punished. And he comes back and he says, "This tree has been there for 200 years. It has given shelter. Pregnant women have sat there who have come to visit the temple. And when the river runs dry, it's so hot that this is what." He goes on adding reasons why the tree should not be cut. In the end, he says, "That is a master stroke. The tree bears your name, so how can I cut it? Because it is a Marudamaram." That the quick wit of that man, I think it was a very, and also how he talks of what nature and how we should look at environment, how it is part of our lives, and cutting is not the answer. And the king is happy, and I think he goes and looks at another tree for the chariot. It ends well.
Thank you for your observations. Now we could move on to the questions. There's a comment in the chat box. Excellent discussion. Thanks for organizing this discussion. Based on these articles, how will you perceive or construct USR's overall personality?
We have kind of answered, isn't it? We have already answered that almost.
Yeah, but in the context of liberal and orthodox, but any other aspect that you would want to take?
I would like to answer that question, Mr. Ravi, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
One part of OVSR that I hadn't quite expected before I translated this essays was his sense of humor. And this aspect of is taken, I think, in the story that he tells of all the battles that he had to fight to get a good table in the presidency college when he was teaching Tamil there, or in Chennai in Mylapore when he was he had heard of the story of how a poet or a teacher of some sort had tried to catch a thief. And for me, what was interesting about both these stories, without revealing too much about what the story is, there was a lightness in his ability to see the wit and fun of day-to-day acts of humor, of which we may not expect from a man of his scholarship and erudition. And I'm happy we were able to include 3 or 4 of those essays as well. And I think we're today very proud that we have put in essays that will appeal to the most scholarly, that will appeal to people who are more keen on the history and heritage of those times, and then also for people, lay readers, or maybe even young adults, to read a story and laugh at them and enjoy them as well.
There is a question. Dr. Thiru, you have worked at the ground level in northern part of India and hence have a wide understanding of the cultures both in North and South. How do you think USA would fare with a North Indian interested in Tamil culture? This is a question by Abhishek Shandilya. He is said he has addressed it to everyone, but specifically to Dr. Thiru.
I think that he would fare very well because what he has written are for everybody. As we discussed earlier, basically it is about the way one should live life. The humorous incidences everybody would enjoy, the informative value hidden in the essays everybody would like. More importantly, the lessons which are in each of these essays, it's applicable to everybody, North Indians, South Indians, everybody.
Would the other panelists like to answer?
Absolutely, I totally agree with Dr. Thirupuga, and as I said in my anecdote yesterday, that this group of very well-traveled, erudite people from Delhi were totally able to relate. At the end of the day, I suppose the human nature is unchanging and universal and eternal. So, and that is the soul of the book, really.
We have Sridhar Narasimhan raising his hand.
Yeah.
The administrator can allow.
Yeah. Hello. Are you able to hear this?
Yeah. Yeah. Please go on.
Namaskaram and thanks to everyone. One question: his autobiography Yen Kadai is being reviewed as a very great book. There are so many people who wants to read at least one page from that book before they go to sleep. It's a very important book. People perceive it with a lot of reverence for that book. My question to the panel is, have you read his autobiography and this set of essays? How does it compare? How does it different from each other? I may make a clear-cut question. I mean, his autobiography is there. His articles are also there. How would you compare these two? I mean, what is the collective this thing?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sridhar Narasimhan. Maybe Justice Prabha Sridevan could take that question.
I don't think that there is any great difference in the style. There he's talking about his life in N. Charitra. But there too he talks of how he searched and his relationship with the Thiruvadurai Adinam people. And so I would not say that it is very different. N. Charitra is extremely easily readable and you can go and read it again and again. And that's how these essays are also. A very light touch he has. Extraordinarily light touch.
Thank you.
Actually, if I could raise the question of how we interacted with other great writers, his own teacher, Meenakshi Sundaram Pillai, was of course revered by him. But his meetings with, say, Tagore, or his interactions with Subramania Bharati, do we have much information on those other than his brief descriptions?
There were, I remember, one set of letters that were exchanged with some writers and scholars in France. But it may have not, shown very different aspects of his life. But there was this certainly a very scholarly connection between some writers over there. But we didn't choose that in the publication. But it revealed a sense of, like I said in the Mayan chapter, a sense of tolerance, a sense of understanding, curiosity more than anything else of what was happening in France and writing it.
Because he seems to have impressed Tagore very much. We impressed him enough for him to write a poem on Uvesa. Similarly, I think he himself was very impressed with Subramania Bharati's poetry. Dr. Thirupugar, would you have any information on his interaction with other writers?
I have not read his N. Kadai, so I will not be in a position to comment.
There
Pradeep,
is-
we wanted to say. Yeah. Yes, Dr. Chandramouli, are we out of time?
No, there is one more in the chat which says heritage and cultural implications are more often overlooked now. I'm glad that the nuances that connect with the life has been so well brought out by the excellent choice of essays chosen to be translated. I think here again, if there are any comments from Mr. Thirupugar, it's because you have analyzed the book so well.
Yes, sir. 3 or 4 essays, particularly the Women of Tamil Nadu, Women in Golden Times, the essay on musical instruments. Many essays talk about our heritage, culture. So these essays do bring about our ancient culture, values, heritage in a very nice manner.
There's a question here by Mr. P. Ranganathan. If government, which is very vocal on popularizing Tamil, doing enough to propagate the writings of Uvesa? So definitely, the book is a part of the Tamil Nadu Textbook Society scheme of taking Tamil to a larger audience. We're very grateful for that, and of course, the editor, Vinny Krishnan and Yogi Books. But certainly, this would not have been possible without the Tamil Nadu Textbook Society. Their scheme. They certainly are, and I think it's once the book is out, it's really up to all of us as readers and lovers of Tamil and literature and history and heritage to take it to a much larger audience. That's my answer to this.
Thank you, Justice Babasai Devan, Dr. Thirupugar, and Pradeep Chakravarti for sharing your thoughts and on your translation. Dr. Chandramouli, could you take over for the concluding remarks?
Thank you very much for that very interesting discussion. I must thank the moderator, Sri Ravi, for excellently conducting this whole panel discussion. Sri Thirupugar, I think he has done an expert job, an excellent job of dissecting the book and presenting to us lay readers, all the essence of what the translators have done. And of course, we would be remiss if we did not thank Justice Prabhasi Devan and Pradeep Chakravarti, the authors, the translators of the book. Well, thank you very much for that excellent panel discussion, and we hope to see you next week. On the 2nd of April, we have the life and times of Kalki. So for Tamil lovers, I think this has been, like they say in the popular Tamil channels, this is a Tamil Varam. So we have the life and times of Kalki by translation again by Srimati Gauri Ramnarayan, and this is on the 2nd of April. So we hope to see all of you back there for that session. From the CIC, we are thankful once again to all our listeners or all our participants in this program. The next program for information of all is a live program, and this will be in the Madras School of Economics. So please save the date, 2nd April. That is when we meet again. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Ravi. Thank you, Dr. Thirupugar. And thank you, Pradeep.
My thanks to all the panelists, to Dr. Chandramouli and the Chennai International Center as well. Thank you.